Hey friends, time for theater history. Okay, so today we're going to talk about the independent theater movement. This is a logical outgrowth of the realistic plays that we were talking about last week. By the way, you might hear the dog barking every now and then because people are walking in front of my house and she feels the need to bark at them. Don't worry, we're all fine. Okay, so we have these new realistic plays. They're super edgy, super interesting. They've got all this dirty stuff in them, right? They're not idealistic. They're showing us the dark underbelly of society. They're talking about sexually transmitted diseases and adultery and incest and women leaving their children, right? So, where are they going to be produced is a serious issue, as we talked about last week, where we see these prominent actresses who don't want to be associated with roles like Nora. We see theaters refusing to do the plays as written. We have Ibsen writing his own changes to the plays so that he can have some control over it, right? The issue of how and where these plays will be produced is serious in the problem. What we need are new theaters for the new drama. Enter Andre Antoine. This is Andre Antoine. He is French. He lived in Paris. He was an amateur actor, really just meaning he couldn't get work as an actor. He auditioned for the Comédie Française, but he wasn't hired for small roles, which means he never got in line to become a sociétaire or pensionnaire, right? So he had a day job. He worked for the Paris gas company as a clerk. This doesn't mean he pumped gas for people, right? Because they didn't have gas stations and cars, very many of them, yet in the 1880s. It was just a new invention. Rather, what he was doing the Paris gas company was like being the guy you'd come pay your utility bill to. I mean, it's a seriously dull job. Being the clerk at the Paris gas company is like the opposite of being an actor at the Comédie Française. So he was artistically unsatisfied, to say the least, and he decided that he would do something to change his circumstances. He had seen the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen's company. It was a major influence on him. He liked the style of production they did. That real stuff on stage style really excited him. The ensemble acting excited him. And he was reading the new realistic plays by people like Ibsen and Strindberg. And he wanted to not only see those plays produced, he wanted to produce them himself, and he wanted to act in them. He really wanted to direct them. He was excited about directing. So he decided to change his circumstances so that he could do this work. And what that meant for him was to start his own theater. Now you might be thinking, well, that's a very logical decision. Start your own theater if you're a frustrated artist who can't get anybody to hire you to do the work you want to do. Yeah, it's a very logical idea, except nobody was doing that before Andre Antoine. He kind of invented this. Before that, think about all the theater companies we have talked about. They already existed as state theaters, or theaters associated with an aristocratic family or a family troupe of actors, and people join them or leave them, but people aren't founding theater companies, right? That's not a thing that's going on. Andre Antoine invents that. And what he does when he invents it is he also invents a whole new business model, organizational model for theater companies than had ever existed before. More on that in a few minutes, okay? First, I want to tell you a little bit about what he liked, what he was interested in doing as a theater artist, because it will help you understand his work. And it will connect to all sorts of other things we have already talked about. Okay, he wanted to use amateur actors, not because he wanted subpar actors, right? That's not what that means. It means he wanted actors who weren't already involved in the industry, already sort of doing it the way everybody already did it. He wanted people who were hungry, like he was, and who would embrace new forms of acting and plays. So he was looking to employ the next generation, the rising generation of actors. And he wanted from them more believable acting. We've been talking about this, right? This idea of more believable acting. He wanted acting that would meet the standards for believable action that these new realistic plays were writing. Had written into them. He was also interested, by the way, in naturalistic plays. Naturalism is extreme realism. much more focused on real-time passing and people handling real objects on stage, and long meandering scenes that don't have a lot of dramatic structure because they're more like how things really play out. I mean, naturalism is extreme realism, and he liked that too. He was very interested in producing that kind of work, which requires more believable acting, not so stagey and presentational. He was interested in the fourth wall convention, which we know already existed. Denis Diderot was interested in it, right? But André Antoine was particularly excited about embracing the fourth wall convention. He liked real stuff on stage, no surprise, considering his indebtedness to the Duke of Saxe-Meiningen, and he liked practical lighting as opposed to the main way they were lighting things in the period, which is overhead chandeliers and footlights. He wanted practicals, working practical lights on stage, like lanterns on tables that actors would turn on and off to illuminate themselves in ways that were believable to the scene. So this makes sense, right, for what we've already learned about sort of the period and the up-and-coming tendencies towards realism. By the way, he so liked putting real stuff on stage. He was famous for using props that were as authentic as possible. He very famously put real beef carcasses right from the slaughterhouse on stage for a play called The Butchers in 1888. And this is a photograph. It's a little bit later than the 1880s. It's closer to 1900, 1901. But it's a production of a naturalistic play called La Terre by Émile Zola that Antoine directed at his second theater. The Théâtre Antoine is his second theater. Theatre Libre, which I'm talking about now, is his first theater. But this is a naturalistic play. And yes, that's a chicken on stage and people in a hayloft and lots of hay, and about 35 people come often on stage in this play. Sometimes they never come back. They're just in one moment and they leave again. Naturalism, again, really interested in Zola. But he founded this theater called the Theatre Libre, which means, who's taking French? That's right, the free theater. Not that it was free to go to, but that it was free from government intervention, because it was a private subscription organization that you joined, and not a theater that you bought a ticket for a night to see a show. It was a subscription, a club that you joined. By doing that, he was able to raise capital from the beginning of a season. So you paid for a membership, and now he had the money and he could use that to produce his plays. It meant it was a private organization, and so it wasn't under the rules in Paris of what could be a theater, right? We have rules about this. There's the Comédie Française and the opera, right? And to do spoken and sung drama in French. That was it. But this isn't a theater, it's a private club, so it circumvents that law. And it also circumvents censorship laws about what plays are allowed to be performed publicly, because it's not a theater. So it kind of bypasses these rules. This is the genius of the independent theater model. André Antoine contributes to European theater in the period this very model, an independent theater concept. Meanwhile, he's also continuing to popularize real stuff on stage and realistic staging practice, which had started previously in the century, and he is promoting realistic and naturalistic plays and playwrights in these very realistic, real stuff on stage productions that are being done in Paris, but through circumventing the laws governing what theaters can and can't do and what can and can't be a theater. It's all quite genius, and it catches on. We see this trend for independent theaters sweep across Europe. For example, there's one that opens in Paris called the Freibühne. It's founded by Otto Brahm in 1889. Freibühne means anyone? That's right, free theater in German. Their first production was Ibsen's Ghosts. That's that play about sexually transmitted disease and incest and adultery and secrets, right? So, you start independent theater, you produce Ghosts to sort of say, here's your calling card. In fact, the Independent Theater, founded in 1891 in London by J.T. Grein, also first produced Ibsen's Ghosts, although they will become famous for being the house that introduces the world to George Bernard Shaw, pictured here with his nice little pipe. they sort of discovered George Bernard Shaw at the Independent Theater. And an independent theater will be founded in Moscow, Russia in 1898. More on that in the very next lecture.